So, just to get us started, can you provide us a bit of background about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Rob McMorran. I'm a researcher, a social researcher in RESAS in the Scottish Government, which is part of the government that basically looks after research, evidence, and analysis relating to sort of rural and environmental areas of interest to policy. And I've been there for about a year and a half, going on 2 years now, I think. And prior to that, I was a researcher in Scotland's Rural College, working mainly in the areas of sort of land use behaviours, and rural development.
In your experience, are there any specific issues that researchers should be aware of or take into account when engaging with policy professionals?
Yeah, I think there probably are. Yeah, I mean, you asked what successful engagement was there, I suppose, and I sort of was talking about it more in terms of the evidence, but on the kind of what should they be aware of and stuff on a practical level, putting aside the is this good research? Am I engaged enough with it or whatever? On a practical level, policy researchers will be very focused on what's the outcome going to be and is it going to be useful to me? They're not mad keen on super long meetings with like really complex kind of academic discussion of theoretical frameworks or methods. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't understand it or that they're not interested in it on some level. It's just that they have a kind of a focal point of focus and they want to get at that key thing that's most relevant to them. I mean, I'm kind of generalizing a bit, because everyone's different, but that's sort of probably how I would see it. So clear communication is really important of the main findings. That's the first thing. So what are your findings, and what are they based on? And so in relation to what they're based on, is the sample good? Is it a representative sample? Is it a strong sample? And be honest about the caveats, the weakness of what you do. I find sometimes that being on the other side, that researchers are kind of keen to promote their work. They're not always as keen to point out the caveats, but actually I think that it's really important that researchers do that because, at the end of the day, most people will still recognize the value to the findings. But if you're not kind of flagging the caveats, then sometimes people will be a bit uncertain about, okay, how far can we go with this? What does this really mean? Is this based on a small sample? Does there need to be more work? And so on, So they're kind of looking at it from a kind of a utilitarian, kind of like a functional perspective, really. What can I get from this? Is it good evidence? Are these people telling me the caveats and the weaknesses and the gaps so that I'm aware of them for when I do my 2-page briefing for the minister or whoever, so that's what they kind of need to get. Key findings. What's your kind of, is it robust? What's the evidence that it's drawing on, like, what's the sample like or whatever, and what are the kind of related, the caveats that are related to that. And other things, I suppose, again, quite practical, but often they're very busy. We're working across lots of different areas as opposed to focusing. Some researchers will be, as you know, kind of more focused on one area for a long period of time. Tend to be a bit more, I suppose, 9 to 5, but often, it depends again who you're kind of speaking to. But you do get a bit more staff turnover in government. So it's just being aware of that somebody might have been in a position for a short period of time in that policy area. So they may have a very good grasp of how government works and how policy is done, but won't necessarily understand, if they're early in that post, won't necessarily understand all of the kind of the background of that policy area. And like I said, they'll see what you're doing in a functional way. And so as a result of that, they probably more, again, I am generalizing because often people will read whole reports and they will be interested in the detail. But more generally, if you're talking about policy as a general kind of, group, they will tend to be more interested in the punchy outputs, the kind of, which have links in them to the longer documents and the bigger chunks of evidence or whatever. So you need to identify the policy relevance of your work. You need to kind of help them with that and signpost why it's relevant, and flag it clearly, and maybe through, recommendations or whatever, or just making that link to policy really kind of clear.